So we are finishing up a series today, and throughout the entire series, we've been talking about faith. And we're talking about faith in some specific ways that I'll explain in a minute. But the essence of everything that's happened over the past 6 weeks while we've been together in this topic is that we wanted to figure out what it looks like to have faith, and then to have that faith stand, right? To withstand some of the natural off-ramps that might come to faith, to withstand some of the big things that happen that blow up our faith or shake us. And I find myself today, this is the last message in the series, and honestly, this is the one that I planned first, and then everything else kind of built up to this moment. And full transparency, I found myself rewriting this message like 6 times this week. And you'll see why in a minute. There's a lot of me wrapped up in it. But the other part of it is because I know that I can talk about this in a really intellectual way, or we can talk about this in a really a theoretical way, but this is boots on the ground life, right? I mean, faith, you're living this out every day. You're not just coming to church. This is not the only environment in which your faith matters, right? Your faith matters at work, and your faith matters at home, and your faith matters with your kids, and your faith matters at school. Your faith matters in class. It's like, it's every day, and every day we're facing different circumstances or different troubles that come our way. And so it's not just something we talk about in theory. It's very practical, it's very authentic, and it's very, very real. And at the heart of what faith really is this passage from Hebrews chapter 11. And it's the one that for me, growing up in Sunday school, was one of the first ones I had to memorize, but it was also the one that kept coming back in my brain over and over again when I finally was putting my faith back together. And it just simply says this. Now, this is what faith is. It's just a definition, okay? Faith is confidence in what we hope for. Confidence just means I trust it, right? That there's this trust, this absolute trust in what I hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. That's the biblical, scriptural, Christian definition of faith. And maybe you heard that before, right? If you've been around church long enough, I'm sure you've heard this verse and thought about it and how it applies to your life. But you also, again, for those of you that are more on the outside of the church or still trying to figure out where your place is, and I literally talked to someone very recently that they said that they're not really sure what they believe, what we believe, but if it's true, they want it to look like this. And I think that's the most authentic, real thing I've ever heard someone say about what we're trying to do at TCAT is that if it is real, I want it to look like this, I just don't know yet, right? And if you find yourself in that place, this is what we all, as Jesus followers, were aspiring for. Is this hope and this confidence and this assurance that Jesus really is who he says he is, and everything else just kind of falls into place around that. But if you grew up in church like I did, every Sunday from the time I grew up in a church that did christening because I was in a mainline church, and so for literally days after my birth forward, I was in the church. Right? When I tease my son, because it's the same way, the first time that we went to church, the first time he went to church was a few days after, literally before he was born, but right after he was born, 2 days later, we're in church and I'm preaching on the Sunday. Like he was there. He didn't miss a Sunday. He's not missed a Sunday his whole life, unless he just picked to. But from the beginning, our whole family's been steeped in this culture. And so I grew up with this, if I might say, this very structured, oriented, kind of stacked, towered, neat, tidy version of faith. Anybody's faith, you felt like it looked like this, or maybe it still looks like this? That it's just it's perfect, and everything's in order, and it looks so neat and tidy, and this was my faith from elementary school all the way up to high school. Just all the blocks exactly where they're supposed to be, everything in the right order. And then what ended up happening in my life was that somewhere along the way, and I'm going to tell you how this fits together in a minute, but along the way, some of this stuff started shifting for me. And the first big block happened. It was 9/11 for me. I was a sophomore. This was a month before I got cut from the basketball team. You can see how all this trauma fits together now, right? But a month before I get cut from the basketball team, 9/11 happens. And I just remember having this piece of my faith come out. And I went to youth group because if y'all remember when 9/11 happened, if you were alive during this time, all the flags went up, patriotism through the roof, which I felt and all of us felt, but then also people just flocked to the church. And so I had been marginally connected in the youth group. I went on every Sunday, but I was one of those guys that always had questions, and whenever I had questions, people would just tell me to shut up, and it drove me nuts. And so I remember after 9/11 going to youth group that Wednesday and asking my youth director the simple question, why do bad things happen to good people? right? And he looked at me, and I know he probably meant well just in the moment because he was struggling with his own stuff, but he said, we just don't ask questions like that. And so that was block number one for me. And then, again, a month later, I get cut from the basketball team. Blah. I'm going to take all these off the top, too, because that was bad. So I had the emotion of 9/11 and this kind of question to my, wait a minute, God, I thought you had a plan. I thought this is the way my life was supposed to work. And then 9/11 happens, and then I get cut from the basketball team. And then a little bit later, again, I realized my dream of playing basketball in college is now gone. I know I talked about anxiety last week, and this is probably creating some anxiety for some of y'all, and I'm very sorry for that. It'll be over in just a couple of minutes, I promise. But I found myself, all of these pieces of the faith that I just thought were so strong continued to be taken away. This stuff just kept crumbling in a way that I just didn't anticipate. And then I get to college, right? I'm finally out of the house for the first time, and I realized that and I can make my own rules, I can make my own, destiny. And I went to church for probably the first, month or two that I was at church. But then, it was a very rigid kind of mainline church, and I heard a message about marriage and how basically what he was saying, and it was bad theology, I think personally, but he was just talking about the fact that God didn't really care about our relationships. And so then again, because I was dating someone who I wanted to marry at the time, then my faith kind of went like that. And so then a couple of weeks later, I go to CSF, which was a Christian Student Foundation. And while I was there, I just looked around, and everybody had this look on their face. And they had this I'm looking like maybe you saw it today, maybe you came in the room today and you just look around and people are singing and their eyes are closed and their hands are up and they just seem so into it. And you look around like, I don't have that. I don't know why I don't feel that way. They feel that way. Why don't I feel that way? And so sooner or later, I started pulling on some strands, and things started getting a little bit worse. And the next thing I knew, I go to an English class, and somebody started telling me that the Bible was just a fictional book, or that it was written as literature. They started pulling on some threads of different things, and the next thing I know, I looked at all the pieces and I didn't really know how to put them back together again. And I wasn't really sure I wanted to. And if you've experienced this or are experiencing this, this is not some sort of intellectual exercise. This is a painful thing. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about this, but before I do, I just want to own the fact that the reason that I found myself rewriting this message over and over and over and over again this week is because for some of you all that are doing this right now, I have been where you are. And I know in a lot of ways why you're there, and I know in a lot of ways the things that might have got you there, but your story is your story, so I can't speak to everything that you've gone through. And so I found myself going like, what do I say to the cynical when I was a cynic myself? And so understand that everything that I'm about to say for the next 20 minutes or so while I'm on stage is really meant to give you a picture of what it looked like for me to step out of this. But that if this is where you are, I would love to talk to you and walk through this with you one step at a time. Because I've been there and I've lived it, and there is something on the other side. But hold that thought for a minute. Because we're in a series we've called I Will Follow. And see, the point of wanting to even put it back together in the first place is that we started this series off by saying there are natural off-ramps to faith. And then in those off-ramps, because we know, in the moment now, maybe if you're comfortable, you're not there, you're not in this crisis, this place of crisis, but you're in a place of rooted, grounded, following with Jesus, you know who you believe in, right? We talked about that throughout the whole series. You know that Jesus really is who he says he is. It's just in certain circumstances, when certain things happen, it's hard to see that, right? And so we made this pre-decision that in those moments, what am I going to go back to? What am I going to go back to when those things happen? And how am I going to process this so I can keep following? Because I believe. I really do believe. I just don't know how to take a step forward. And so for the past 5 weeks, we've examined 5 of those off-ramps, right? Number 1, we talked about when life feels heavy. I will follow you when life feels heavy. When life hands me something really heavy and really hard, I'm going to hand it right back to God and say, Lord, I can't, but you can. And number 2, we said, I will follow you when the path is unclear. Lord, when I don't know what the next step is, I'm not going to let what I don't know keep me from doing what I can do. And I'm going to take a step in the direction that I believe you would have me go based on what you've told me, based on the truth, based on so I won't become static. I'm going to take a step forward in faith and believe and trust so that you will catch my foot when it lands. And then we talked about following, right? I will follow you when I'm exhausted. When I've exhausted every other option, when I have ran down every corner, when I just don't feel like I have anything left, God, I'm going to continue to follow you because you are the way, the truth, and the life. And you came that I might have life to the full. Number 4, I'm going to follow you when life overlooks me. When I feel like the thing that I wanted to have happen, the first domino for me, the first Jenga block for me, when I felt like the life was supposed to go a certain way and then it doesn't, that doesn't mean that God doesn't love me. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't have a plan for me. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have a next step for me. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have an ultimate preferred future for me. And I will choose to follow when life overlooks me. And then last week we talked about this. I will follow you when I'm anxious. When all of the stuff in my brain is telling me to quit, all of the stuff in my brain is telling me to unfollow, all the stuff in my brain is telling me to run for cover or to blow up or to not, to do anything but follow you, I will choose to follow you. Because what we said last week, and this is going to build on what we're talking about today, faith is not belief without truth. It's not. Faith is not belief without truth. There is rooted, grounded truth that Jesus really is who he says he is. And there's a lot of other fluff that gets caught up in the media and caught up in maybe what you study and hear or whatever, but the centerpiece of our faith is not that. And again, I went to a seminary where the motto was the whole Bible for the whole world, but the Bible is not even the center of our faith. Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, is the centerpiece of our faith. Faith is not belief without truth, but trust without reservation. Trust without reservation. It's look, I don't understand this situation, but I know who I believe. And I don't fully think I understand how this is all supposed to work, but I am not a victim of all of my circumstances. I am not the sum of my circumstances. I am a son or a daughter of God. And I will trust without reservation. Now, nobody gets this perfect. Okay, the other piece of this, just for the record, is doubt is a part of faith. And if you've not been to our church before, I say that a lot because I believe it. There's always going to be moments. If you didn't have doubt, if there wasn't a reason to doubt or to struggle, then it wouldn't really be faith. Because faith is hope and assurance. And then that leads me to what we're going to talk about today, which is number 6, the last piece of the puzzle in this I Will Follow series, is I will follow you when my faith is in crisis. And that, for me over there, was a crisis because I didn't necessarily want to stop believing. And I don't know that I ever did. When I tell this story to people, I always say, it didn't feel authentic to me to no longer believe in God because I've seen too much and felt too much. But what I grew up with wasn't working. And the faith that I had, the Santa Claus kind of faith of God being this eternal vending machine or whatever, I'm not even sure I really believed it. I didn't believe in the right God at the time, is what I often say, is I had this very narrow, very selfish view of God, and when he didn't align with that, my faith fell apart. Now, that may not be your story. And there was a lot of other things that happened in the middle of that gap that I didn't tell you about. I experienced the death of a loved one for the first time, right around my freshman year, right before all this stuff happened. And I remember feeling like I'd never seen that before. I'd seen death and been around, but I'd never seen someone I cared about deeply suffer that way. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer my junior year in high school. And I remember thinking she was the reason that I believed the way that I did, right? And her absolute ultimate faith all the time. How could this happen? And just the reality was that we kind of live in this culture where we question everything. If you notice this, it's not just people questioning their faith. This is the thing that I was that I realized after I began putting the pieces of my faith in my life back together, was that it wasn't just that I was doubting faith. I was doubting everything. I was cynical about everything. And just for a minute, so you understand kind of how we got here. This idea is actually a historical movement. It's not just something that's affecting the church or just affecting faith. It's something that's happening throughout history. There's these 3 cultural movements. And the first one was actually what historians call modernism. And it's 1890s to 1950s-ish. It really end of 39 to 40, right around Pearl Harbor is when they think that this shifted, but it's a little blurry line. And modernism, by historians' tale, was defined by absolute truth, right? So this is the Enlightenment era. This is when, the industrial revolution, all the cool stuff that happened that brought us all the machines, and it was an era defined by absolute truth, that things could be known, and that they wanted to know everything, and they were seeking out every truth that they could, which was followed quickly by the era that we're in or just ending that is called postmodernism. And this one, from the 1950s to the 2020s-ish, was defined by skepticism. But here's why we can relate and understand that this happened. Because what happened right around the end of this era? Pearl Harbor, followed by World War II, followed by the Korean War, followed by the Cold War, followed by the assassination of MLK, followed by the assassination of JFK, followed by Desert Storm, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, followed by 9/11. And then we had that brief interlude from 9/11 forward because we were all on our guard, and then 2016 happens, Trump versus Hillary. Fake news and political drama everywhere. Everybody drew a line. And then, the word we don't want to say anymore, the pandemic. And we've been living in this era of time that has slowly eroded our trust, not just in faith, but in everything. Everything. Everyone, have you noticed this? I don't know if you've lived in this, but everybody's cynical about everything. And part of it is the old joke from the movie Home. I don't know if you've seen the movie Home with the little purple aliens, but Steve Martin's character at one point goes, "The internet does not lie." And everybody laughs because you know that it does, right? It's just this reality that you don't know what to trust anymore, and you don't know who to trust. Which, interestingly enough, has led us to this next phase. That historians, I'm not making this up, okay, so you can Google this. Historians are calling this next phase we've entered into metamodernism. And no, this is not endorsed by Facebook or Metaverse or any of that other stuff, okay? This has nothing to do with that. But you see why that might be appealing? Because you offer to someone, hey, would you like to live in a world that's not this one? And then people are like, ooh, maybe. But anyway, metamodernism, right? The definition of metamodernism that historians are starting to describe this era of time we find ourselves in right now is this. Similar to how postmodernism arose when people became dissatisfied with modernism's certainty, metamodernism arose when people became exhausted by postmodernism's skepticism. Have you found yourself living in this? You're just exhausted by all the cynicism. You're just exhausted by all of the, can I trust this or can I not trust this? You're just exhausted by questioning everything. When I was a kid, Pluto was still a planet, by the way, and we told us to trust science, and you listen to science and you trust it, and now we don't trust anything. And we had science then that's different than science now. It's not just faith; it's everything. It's an allscape. And as a society, this is not just an American thing. This is a global thing. We find ourselves in a place where we don't know what to trust. And the interesting thing that historians are saying, if you go to the next slide for me, is that metamodernism being characterized by exhaustion from skepticism means that we're in an era where people are going to kind of meld the last two together, and instead of looking inside ourselves or tearing everything down, we've decided that we want to kind of look up and look around and try to figure out what it is that's true, which, spoiler alert, is really bad news for secularism. Because when you start looking up and around, you tend to find God. You look around long enough and God tends to find you. But, okay, we've justified how we got here and maybe some of the things that might have been going on in my brain to make all the Jenga pieces fall apart for me. But that doesn't really solve the equation of why, right? And if I could just, before I go any further, I just want to throw this on the table. Christianity is growing. It is the largest world practiced religion in the world right now. 2.2 billion people practice Christianity everywhere. In fact, it's projected to grow to 5 billion by the end of 2025. Christianity is exploding in places like Africa and Asia and South America. All over those areas, Christianity is absolutely exploding. And the only reason I tell you that is because I don't want you to believe the lie that everyone is leaving Christianity in droves. It's a lie. And I don't want you to believe that the lie that people have left the faith of their childhood behind either, because that's not what's actually happening, though that is happening for a lot of us. And 5 minutes down the rabbit hole of the ex-evangelical hashtag on Instagram or, any of the stuff about deconstruction that's floating around social media, and you find yourself in this weird, wonky place. I did it over the past 8 days. Where you're like, well, I don't want to throw all of this out, but I don't understand this, and I don't know how all of these pieces fit together. And I find myself in a faith crisis. And if you find yourself in a faith crisis, there's really a handful of things that you can do. And these are the normal responses to faith crisis. Number one, you do the religious thing and you just pretend like nothing's wrong, right? It's the meme of the dog, right? The meme of the dog in the house and everything's on fire. This is fine. It's fine, right? It's okay. Everything's okay. And you just pretend. And I will tell you, I did that for a while, right? The piece of the story that I didn't tell over there was that, I started in my sophomore year in high school questioning, I don't know how all this fits together, and no one will give me an answer. And they're acting like me asking this question is a serious problem. Spoiler alert, it was not a problem to ask questions. And in fact, so you know, to the people that work with our college students and to the people that work with our high school students, when I interviewed them, the one thing I asked them was, if a person comes up and asks you a question, what will your response be? And they are here because they answered correctly. I'll tell you what the answer to that is in a minute. But this is the normal response. It's fine. It's okay. It's not a big deal. I won't look. I'll keep the blinders on. I won't look. And I'll just keep hunkering down and pretend like everything's fine. And you may feel like this is what the church wants you to do. And you may feel like this is what you're supposed to do because of your religion or whatever else. But this is not a healthy response to a faith crisis. Because eventually the flames get you. Number two, the other side of it is this other response is just tear it all down to nothing. The fancy word for this that we're using right now is called deconstruction. And deconstruction, interestingly enough, is a word we've co-opted from a completely different understanding of the word by philosophers like Derrida and others who have talked about the idea of breaking apart systems and things that we don't really need anymore, or breaking them down to the core and the foundation. We co-opted it for faith and other things. And so the basic faith definition for what deconstruction is, even though if you Google you'll find 12 different definitions for this, is just simply this. It's the process of systematically dissecting, doubting, questioning, and possibly rejecting the beliefs you grew up with. And as I said a minute ago, this doesn't just have to be about Jesus. It's everything. It's questioning, is Pluto a planet? Is the sky really blue? Is the grass really green? Is there really air that I'm breathing? It's everything. Questioning everything and dissecting and doubting and questioning everything. This is the basic idea of deconstruction. The problem with this movement is, though, that the idea is that you just tear it all down and then never put anything else back. You just tear it all down and leave it on the ground. There's no reconstruction that's a part of this. There's no put it back together. There's no heal the pain. There's no fix the mess. There's no fix the blocks. It's just tear it all down, lay it on the ground, and be done with it. And I personally was in that camp for a while, and then I found myself going, but I've seen too much, and I've experienced too much. And I don't know that everything that I thought about God is true, but something about God is true. And I found myself searching for a different way. And what I discovered and what I found, and this is not something that's completely original to me, this is what's happening. Pastors are saying this around the world, and people are finding this, coming back to the faith of this, reconstructing the faith of this, is that the third way is actually the way of Jesus. Not the way of the church, not the way of the pastor, not the way of the denomination, but the way of Jesus. That he actually has a way that our lives are supposed to work to begin with. And that following him and living for him is actually the way this whole mess was supposed to look to begin with. And we missed that along the way. And well-meaning, I'm not saying that your pastor, didn't want what's best for you. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not picking on the church. I'm a part of it. But somewhere along the way, we lost the core essence of what our faith was about, and it is about following this man, the Son of the living God. If you build your faith on anything else, it's very easy for it to crumble. And in my case, mine was built on God doing everything I ever wanted him to do whenever I wanted him to do it. Because I had this picture, right? It's the picture that God is this eternal vending machine. And I grew up with that. I grew up thinking that if I did the right thing and said the right thing and walked the right way, then God would bless me. And if I didn't, he's going to strike me down with a lightning bolt or cast me out or burn me up or stomp me out or something. And I lived in that perpetual tug of war between do what God wants me to do or else for 16 years. And when people began, when things started crumbling for me was when the equation got misbalanced, so to speak. And I discovered after the fact, a well-meaning, a very amazing person, mentor in my life, helped me walk back out of this by teaching me the way of Jesus, that there's a different pathway for this. And one of the simplest ways to understand this is to see how Jesus approached cynicism. There's a story in Luke chapter 11 where the Pharisees are really upset with Jesus because he's been casting out demons. I know that's not a part of our regular scheduled programming here at TCAT, but it was back then. And Jesus would have these moments where he cast out these impure spirits. And at one point, he helps heal this person who's been suffering for a really long time. And the Pharisees see the healing that has taken place, and they look at him and they go, hey, Jesus, you obviously did this. You cast out these demons because you're the devil or you're a demon yourself. And Jesus, I love it, and please don't hear this as sacrilegious. I promise I'm not being, but he's a little bit snarky back with them, a little bit, okay? Just enough to, he's a human being. It's beautiful. Because what he says is, okay, well, maybe that's true, or the kingdom of God really has come upon you, right? It could be that. Or it really could be that I am who I say that I am, and that the kingdom of God has actually come upon you. And what I love is that he went into the midst of their cynicism, and he didn't call them out for it. He didn't even though he could have because they were being ridiculous, he just kind of sat with them in their cynicism and said that could be true, but what if? And the what if, by the way, is the truth. And I find myself over and over again, what I ended up having to do in the midst of my putting my faith back together was examine each of these pieces and go, okay, it could be this, but Jesus says it's this. And I began building my faith back up on him rather than on anything else. Not even though, again, I believe that the Bible is God's inspired word. I believe it's all holy. I believe that it's all there for us. I believe it's inerrant. I believe it is the guidebook that's been given to us by God. So don't hear what I'm about to say is not that, okay? It's just that I decided I wanted to hear what Jesus had to say, not just what the Bible stories had to say. And when I realized that guys like Luke were eyewitness investigators, they were investigative reporters, and guys like Mark were people who talked to Peter and wrote down his story, and guys like Matthew were actually there and witnessed it, and guys like John were actually there and watched it and witnessed it. We're not listening to Bible stories, we're listening to people tell the story they experienced. And I found myself being able to build my faith back up on that foundation. But there's a verse that came to me in the middle of that justified it later. I didn't find it at the time. But it's from 1 Thessalonians. Paul's having this conversation with a group of people that are sitting in their own cynicism as well. And it's really comforting to me to know that 2,000 years ago, there were still people that were struggling like we do today. And yet the church exists. There's something to that. So Paul says to the Thessalonians in his first letter, do not treat prophecies with contempt. Now, prophecies in this case, he's talking about the word from God. So don't treat this message about God, this message about what God is up to, this message about Jesus, specifically what Jesus is up to. Don't treat it with contempt. Instead, right, test them. I love this, but test them all. Hold on to what's good and reject every kind of evil. So hold them up and go, okay, well, Jesus said this. So if Jesus said this piece doesn't fit with what Jesus said, and cast it out. And so Paul even acknowledges that there's a process in our faith, in the very core of what it means to follow Jesus, that there's going to be this moment where we have to test these things, and we reason them out. That, to me, feels a lot more like reconstruction. And the reason that this whole deconstruction process bothers me so much is because it's not really deconstruction. It's more like demolition. With deconstruction, you expect something else to come back. Like when you see the road project happening on McWright's Ferry Road, I live pretty close to there. There's going to be a great bridge. You can see some of the pieces. Ignore Jack Warner because it's going to look like that for the rest of our lives. But McWright's Ferry, you see something get torn down. You see the construction happening. You know something else is coming on the other side. And when they start digging a hole, I know there's going to be a bridge there eventually. But in our faith, for some reason, we've taken this deconstruction thing to mean I'm going to tear it all down and never put anything back in its place. And so what I want to just do, what I want to give you is a simple process for how it worked for me. And I didn't have these words then, but these are the words that kind of encapsulate what it looks like to step out of a faith crisis in the way of Jesus. And step number one is to take the next step beyond cynicism. I'm not telling you not to be a cynic, okay? I inherently, because of my postmodern influence and everything that's happened to me, I'm an inherent cynic myself. I applaud you for asking questions. And in fact, this is the kind of church where you're not going to get hammered on for asking questions. We have an environment we call Starting Point, right? Where it's all about asking questions. You ask any questions you want. The whole point of this is not to sit in your cynicism, though. Take the next step beyond it. What does it look like to go, okay, again, reason these things out? What do I know to be true? Because something has to be true. What do I know to be true, and what can I do about it? Number two, channel your frustration into positive action. What I learned in kind of studying through the ex-evangelical stuff on the internet and on Instagram and lots of other places is that most people really weren't upset with Jesus. They were upset with the church, right? And there's all sorts of things that the church has done throughout the centuries to cause that. And on behalf of everyone else who's ever stood in front of you with a microphone, I want to apologize for some of the things that have happened. I want to own that. Some of the things that have happened have been ridiculous. I talked to somebody very recently who had been kicked out of their church because they got caught having a beer in a restaurant down the street. Not drunk, not making a mess, just they had a beer, and they asked them not to come back to church. And so I was like, hey, that's not going to happen here. It's just not the way our church is. But there's silly things, right? Maybe you got kicked out of your church because of the way your relationship looked like. You and your wife and your husband and wife, you guys just like got divorced. You don't know why. You got asked to leave the church. Like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But channel your frustration into positive action. One of the reasons we love being for Tuscaloosa is because, again, like the person told me just a couple of weeks ago, like, I don't know if this is all true, but if it is true, I hope it looks like this. Because we want to channel that positive, that frustration into making a difference. Put it to work. Every time you see somebody who looks like you that wasn't welcome in another church, welcome them here. See what happens. Number three, use reconstructive language. Like, own the fact that everything about cynicism and everything about our faith crisis have been tearing stuff down. So start using language that looks like you're building it back up. How can you start practically using language of putting your faith back together, building the pieces back? Start owning some of that language and try to work it into your thought process. Even if it doesn't look like it did when you were a kid, even if it doesn't like fit together the way you think it should, start using the kind of language that puts your faith back together. And then number four, I hope you're not offended by this, pursue Jesus over certainty. See, we have this thing, and again, it's a label of postmodern culture. We have to be, if you can't be certain about it, then you can't think about it. And it can't be possible. But what I want to invite you to do is what I was invited to do, and it worked for me, was to pursue Jesus over that. Like, decide to pursue Jesus first over everything else. Like move away all the gray area stuff from church, move away all the other stuff that you struggled with or all the reasons you might have left, and just pursue Jesus for a second. If Jesus really is who he says he is, if he really was resurrected from the dead, what does that mean for you? And I won't give you the answer to that because I have a very biased, I'm a Jesus follower, so I have a very biased answer to that. I'm not going to force you to believe the same thing that I do about that situation. But if Jesus really is who he says he is, what does that mean for you? To pursue him, to pursue the truth of him, and to build your foundation of your faith and what you believe and how your life works on him first, and let everything else fall where it may. That's how you put the pieces back together. And I just want to say this. We're going to sing a song, and it's more of an anthem than it is more of like a, sin in it and steep in it song. And there's two reasons for that. One, I don't want to emotionally manipulate you. I don't want you to feel like you're being emotionally manipulated by music or by me or by anything else. I just want you to have a moment to think about the way things really might be. And if you're not in a place where you're in faith crisis, what I hope is that you might have a little bit more compassion for your friends, your children, your grandchildren, who find themselves struggling with the faith that you hold to so dearly because they've seen things or experienced things that have made them question. Questions aren't a bad thing, because I believe in my heart that there's always an answer and a lead back to Jesus. And if Jesus really is who he says he is, then life makes a lot more sense with him than it does anywhere else. So I want to pray for you. I'm going to sing this song. I'm going to give you the space to think, to reason, to pray, to shout, whatever you want. But don't miss this opportunity to use it as a space to think. So bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, I know that there's so many of us who have had the threads of our faith pulled on in different ways. There's some of us who feel really uncomfortable even talking about this because it feels like we're welcoming doubt or something else. But God, you're a God who has answers to the questions. You're a God who reaches into our lives and brings truth and hope and life. And you're worth pursuing. And in this space we find ourselves where it doesn't feel authentic to toss you out completely, but it also doesn't feel authentic to keep maybe what we carried in. God, would you just help us to go back to your word, to go back to what you said, to go back to the truth of your Son, and to examine and to reason the things that have been said about Jesus. Give us the opportunity to follow you again. Lord, we love you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.